already throughout the morning, you know, we've talked a lot about the benefits of partnerships. If you look at the paper that Don put up this morning, the conversation that reflects the conversation we had about the successes of the partnerships that you've developed. And so we have this opportunity here in Pittsburgh to really get a glimpse into how the partnerships work here in the city of Pittsburgh. So we have a panel with us today. We have Dr. Karen Hacker from the Allegheny County Health Department, Patrick Dowd, who I think many of you know from Allies for Children, Scott Gutowski from the schools here in Pittsburgh, and then everybody, of course, knows Betty, the team lead from the mayor's office. So, we're doing this like a talk show. We're gonna ask our panelists to talk a little bit about who they are and what their role is in the campaign here in Pittsburgh. So, just a couple minutes each of you, if we could start with that question, just a couple minutes to say who you are and what your role is in the campaign and how you work with the city as a partner. And then, Betty, you can talk from the city's perspective.
Okay, where would you like us to start?
Well, do you want to start, Betty? So you can
Sure.
partnerships and kind of, your thoughts about partnerships that you've developed.
Sure. So my name is Betty Cruz, and I manage special initiatives for Mayor Peduto. And one of those is our Live Well Pittsburgh initiative. And Live Well Pittsburgh actually kicked off following a conversation with Dr. Hacker last year. And parallel to that, we were having our initial rounds with the proposal. I don't know if we had gone to a cross-site yet, but everything was starting to come together. At least there was a lot of energy around the potential for the health enrollment project. So we were working closely with Patrick towards that end as well. I think from the very beginning at the city, we saw the opportunity here to embark on some institutional change that would really celebrate the importance of health enrollment within our own departments and employees and their own families, and also a way to really build cross-sector partnerships. So we're not the experts in this space. The county is the expert as it relates to all things health in our region. And obviously our nonprofit partners are the experts. So as Erica mentioned earlier, having that big tent mentality, how can we build on those partnerships and make sure we're lifting them up along the way?
Great. My name is Scott Gutowski. I'm the Chief of Information and Technology for Pittsburgh Public Schools. Pittsburgh Public Schools represents 25,000 students in the urban core, about 60 schools. Those are averages. But we actually facilitate the data and information management for about 35,000 students. That includes all of our charter school students and our Catholic school students in and around the Pittsburgh urban area. So, where I've come to the table at is, representing the information and technology needs of the district. We have a lot of, really opportune touch points on our student and family needs. Obviously, we're servicing that many students, managing enrollments, managing the health and data records of a great number of those students day in and day out. So I've tried to bolster, these efforts by reminding my team that it's not about, just our data, Pittsburgh Public Schools, but our data, the region's our data. So establishing partnerships with the county and the city has been paramount to kind of turn a new corner for our work. Over the last 5 years, we've been honored to have a pretty significant Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant that's allowed us to establish a pretty robust data set and data warehouse. And using that as a starting point, we've really, learned a great deal and established really strong partnerships within the region to, quite frankly, do more for our students. And I would argue that it's not the data warehouse that's necessary to start those things. It's really just opening up some dialogue and really unpacking what's not working and what is working and where there's new opportunities to kind of work together more regionally representative of the children and families in the whole.
Thanks, and that's a great segue. I'm Patrick Dowd. I'm with Allies for Children, and I think at the beginning of the project, our role was really to help try to bring some folks together. We had a particularly unique moment in the history of Pittsburgh. Dr. Hacker was relatively new to the city and to the health department. Scott was new in his role at the district. Betty was new in her role at the city. And of course, we had a brand new mayor coming into office. And our role, we think, was to sort of help folks come together and help the mayor sort of with his vision of doing good work on behalf of children and youth here in the city. And so that was really our role at the beginning. And throughout, we've tried to play a role of as Scott said and others have, Betty mentioned earlier, trying to open up and continue those discussions and make sure that we're continuing to focus on what's in the best interest of kids here in Pittsburgh.
Hi, I'm Karen Hacker. I'm the director for the county health department here, and Pittsburgh doesn't have its own health department, and I have 130 municipalities, of which Pittsburgh's the largest, but kind of interesting. Some of them are a postage stamp size, and some of them are as big as the city, which is about 300, give or take. The county as a whole is 1.2 million people, so it's a very interesting dynamic here in that in many cases the big city is really the dominant player financially, but here in this county, the county is actually the financial dominant player, and Pittsburgh, as the largest city, obviously is an economic engine, but has had its own set of financial challenges. I got here almost exactly 2 years ago, and I inherited a terrible department that was basically in complete disarray and have been basically rebuilding it, but one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that my relationship with the largest city was a very strong relationship. And I have to say, it's complicated. It is complicated. I think you also have a new mayor, or at least at that time was new, and historically, the city and the county did not work effectively together. They actually, my understanding, and Patrick knows because he was an elected official.
Was.
That's what I said, was. That, I think, presented, so there was this incredible opportunity, which is that there was an alignment between city and county. But I think that there's still a lot of operational issues that have yet to be hammered out. I don't think many people at the city level even would consider that they do anything related to health. Because it's like, oh, that's done at the county, and that's in,
It's over there.
That's somebody else's responsibility, and we're just not involved in that. So this, to me, was a really nice opportunity to do something together, because ultimately, I think collaboration is based on positive experiences. And regardless of whether it's small or medium or large, yeah, sure, it's great if it's large. This was sort of, I'd say, a medium one. But to begin to know each other, to begin to talk to each other, to begin to understand what the strengths and weaknesses of all of your partners are is, I think, really important. I did want to mention, we launched, about 6 months after I got here, we launched a big campaign called Live Well Allegheny, and what we want to do in that campaign, and we're moving along slowly but surely, is we want to get every one of those 130 municipalities, all 42 school districts, to basically meet criteria for what we're calling Live Well communities and Live Well schools, which is very much based in what you heard earlier about health and all policies. And Pittsburgh was our first one, and this was sort of a natural portion of that. The last thing I do want to say is you have to also remind yourselves, and I'm sure all of you know this was the time when the Affordable Care Act was rolling out. And Pennsylvania, like many of the other states represented here, did not do expansion initially. So we were spending a huge amount of our time. Literally, the first week I was here, I was sitting at a table with Sebelius, and we were talking about how we were going to get people enrolled in Allegheny County. Now we actually have expansion, but it took a long period of time. So there was just a lot of opportune stars that sort of came together.
Thank you. So, the next question you've started to answer, Dr. Hacker, by talking about kind of advice, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your partners. So the question that I want to throw out is there anything, looking back, is there anything you wish you knew from the beginning in terms of working in this partnership, working with the city? And I'm going to ask you three first. Thinking about insights or tips that you might give to other organizations that want to partner with city government on a campaign like this.
So I think the first thing that I would throw out is, well, two things. In our particular case, I would say I wish we would have known the rate of the accelerated rate of change that was taking place inside of the city, right? Our city, as you can see, it's a wonderful city. It has been slowly but very successfully growing to the point that you see it at. Over the last 4 years, though, maybe 3.5 years, there's been an acceleration of the rate of growth and development inside the city, which has had a direct impact on who's attending schools, who can afford to live in neighborhoods. So that's one piece that's particular to Pittsburgh. As far as partnerships, I would say understanding jurisdiction limitations. What is it that the county health department can do? And as Dr. Hector pointed out, it's the county health department serving 130 municipalities. So what can it do within the constraints of that? What can the school district do? What can the city do? And how can we sort of work together to work across those boundaries? So really identifying where the limitations are and making sure they're clear, and then building the partnership that facilitates the work based on that.
So I would say certainly as a new person, and for people who are new, it's sort of like trying to understand how the municipal government works and where your cracks are in the veneers that you can insert yourself, and like where the right person is to work with and how to create those relationships. That was certainly an enigma to me, particularly at the beginning of this project when the Peduto administration was really just staffing up and trying to get a handle on, I feel like I was really lucky to meet Betty, because since then, honestly, we meet like, every 2 weeks or something, every 3 weeks. But that, because you can't go to the mayor for everything, or you can, but you're going to basically get sure, go for it, or whatever, and there's not going to be a lot of operational stuff that actually the work gets done. And as I think we all know, the work actually gets done at the very operational level. I think from my perspective as a county health department, and I think for many health departments nationally, we're a shadow of our former selves. I mean, we had district offices. There was a time when our department had 1,000 people in it. We're now 350 or 360. And so I don't, it's interesting because I have 130 municipalities, but pretty much my entire operation is pretty much in Pittsburgh. So it's a very interesting challenge to sort of straddle that fence.
I guess I'm going to answer it with more of an evolutionary answer rather than something that's pinpointable. But one of the things that my team and I and our regional partners are constantly learning from and learning towards is where there are some just bureaucratic frustrations or some institutional hiccups that, quite frankly, until we're all at the table, it's easy for an institution just to cover those challenges with their own internal frustrations or their internal, well, this is how we've always done it. So, my team and I are always looking for those opportunities to kind of raise our heads up, share an opinion or a thought on what we could do differently. And, I always say that, my institution for many, many years, we were also enormous at one point, and now we're working as the shadow of ourselves. But in that shadow, we've had a lot of really great people that I've phrased it, they've been doing a lot of heads down work. They're just doing the things day in and day out, and they really haven't had an opportunity to kind of hear their opinion or hear their suggestions on how we could work a little bit differently. As I alluded to in my introduction, we have an awesome opportunity. We have so many families coming in and out of our schools all day, every day, and if the only question I'm asking those parents are, what do you have in your head that I need rather than what we need, I'm missing a huge opportunity. So we're always evolving along that paradigm to look at what we're doing and making sure that we're highlighting some opportunities to grow within, not only for ourselves, but our regional partners.
Thank you. And I'm going to throw the question to you, Betty. In thinking about working with, whether it's nonprofit partners, county, schools, et cetera, is there anything that you wish you'd known from the start going into this?
Really what bubbles up to me is how much trial and error there was going to be, how much learning as you go, and the need to be flexible and adaptable and make refinements or just scratch something altogether. Yeah, and I think that's been a strength of the partnership. I think everybody has reflected, they're all in. Scott was speaking earlier to the humility that it takes to recognize that you need to make those refinements. So that flexibility, and I don't want to steal your thunder if you want to speak more about humility later, but it was powerful. But how much trial and error was going to go into it along the way, and then we're still learning.
So I have a question for you, Scott. Earlier in the meeting today, and I don't remember who said it, but somebody in the room said if you have to work with the schools, but if you go to the schools and ask them to do anything, their automatic response is going to be no. Oh, that was you? Okay. That sounds like something you'd say. So, but, schools, obviously it's a no-brainer. That's where the kids are, and we're trying to enroll kids. So do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, was the school's initial thought, no, we can't do this? And if so, how did you get to yes? Maybe in Pittsburgh it was different than in other places.
No, not really. So, I mean, it's all about, kind of.
Was it no first? Wait a minute.
No, it was never no with me, but it was no with a lot of my predecessors, let's put it that way. And I think, I'll kind of express it this way, that, what I tried to do with my team was first listen to them and really tried to unpack, and this is maybe a leadership tactic response, but really trying to hear what is important for us first. So I had to start in kind of that selfish place. But from there, trying to bridge that to broader opportunity was somewhat of the artistry to get to a yes. And what I mean by that specifically is that we for many years knew that we had a lot of data processing challenges. State and federal legislation coming down, all kinds of evolving state reporting needs, and yet our business processes and procedures really were not keeping pace. In fact, they were just kind of institutionally inherited. Year in and year out, we just think it's getting done. So the first kind of week on the job, so to speak, I asked my team to bring me every form or application that existed in the entire district, so we could look at the sheer volume of the things that we were asking for from people. I need this enrollment form, or I need this athletic form, or I need this. And just collecting that was jaw-dropping, just as a start, to be like, this is what we're asking people to navigate. And the people are, Patrick and his family, my wife and I, anyone is having to navigate this. And so starting with that, this isn't cool, this isn't healthy, this isn't normal, but this is what the institution has kind of dictated for so many years. So our approach was to charge that kind of appetite for change internally, which then allowed to use that as a vehicle for some other opportunities along the way. And again, I think it's a leadership tactic, but it's one that I think could be orchestrated externally inward, just in terms of having a brief, don't use the word audit, don't use the word evaluation, but just a brief summation of the things that are being called upon from your public to fill out, just to enroll them in what should be a pretty no-nonsense, free and reliable service.
Can I add to that? Mm-hmm. I think there's something really powerful that I experienced early on, which was just asking others what they think, what they want to see, what their opinion is, and seeing this at the city government level. I can't describe how many different meetings I was a part of, and I asked someone who had been a long-term employee, well, what do you think? And they were thrown by the question, and it took a couple more questions before they realized, I really want to know what you think, and together we'll strengthen the outcomes.
So another comment was made at some point about the challenges between city health departments and county health departments. Is there anything you want to share? Is there anything that's come up in relation to turf issues or anything like that to respond to that?
So I came here from Boston, from the Boston area, and as you heard, Massachusetts has what I would consider to be a really crappy public health system, because there's 351 towns and 351 health departments, which is ridiculous, okay? That said, so my feeling was if I was going to do a big public health job, I wanted to do it at the county level. And I actually wanted to be in a county where the biggest city did not have its own health department, because I felt that those communities, and you hear, Chicago's an example, a couple, in some cases the city is the county, like Philadelphia. But in those scenarios, you end up competing. The county ends up competing with the city, and you compete for grants, you compete for resources, or you end up sort of subdividing the jurisdiction between the county, which tends to be the rural, suburban, and the urban core. And I personally was very interested in urban issues. So stepping into a county perspective is quite different, I think, than a city perspective. And particularly if you begin to understand the history of the jurisdiction that you're in. And in this county, it actually becomes very difficult to separate what's happening in the city from what's happening in the neighboring communities. We have our suburban ring, if you want to call it that, is actually, in some cases, at a higher level of disadvantage than our city. And we've done a lot of mapping, and if you look at the area of poverty, it goes right along our river. So it literally tracks through the city right down the Monongahela Valley. And while there is some, I think, improvements, I would say, in the relationship between the city and the suburban communities, there's always that tension. The other thing is that a city is way more complex. It has its own administrative structure. It's obviously a much bigger administrative structure. You go to some of these other small communities and you ask them to do certain things, and it's like, you talk to one person, you get the stuff done. Whereas at the city, you're really, who's on first, who's doing this initiative. And I think one of the things that Patrick said, which is very true of this region, and I think we're seeing this in other cities as they begin to gentrify, there's so much going on simultaneously. So we're kind of having, I would say, initiative-itis, which is an infectious disease. In that, we've got sustainability issue, we've got a resiliency thing, we've got something else, and nobody's really plotting these things out and sort of how they all connect, even though technically I would argue they're all really all part of the same process. So I think from my perspective, that probably one of my biggest challenges is constantly trying to sit back and reconnect the dots. Now the good news is, as the county health department, I don't have any competition. It's just me. I'm the only health department. And as a result, I can be, in many cases, a neutral convener. So we've heard a lot of talk about the hospitals. We have 15 nonprofit hospitals in our jurisdiction. I can get them to all show up in the same room. We have 2 big managed care organizations. I can get them to show up in the same room. We have a big plan for a healthier Allegheny. We have like 75 different organizations, and honestly, they show up. And they come to the table, and they're starting to contribute. So we're really on, I think, at least from my perspective, a real shift in the way business is done in the county. And again, I've only been here 2 years, so you guys can speak to whether that's true or not.
It's an understatement as far as the shift and the positive nature of it. And so just another thing, you used the word turf war, and I think if you think about these 3 institutions, these are 3 very big institutions serving a lot of people, connected in a lot of different ways. And one of the things, and not just Dr. Hacker at the county health department, but also the county executive as part of this project ultimately. I mean, we have leadership in this region in these major governmental organizations that really don't see turf. Okay, there are moments of turf, but ultimately, for the first time in generations here, you can actually see the alignment of the school district, the city, the county health department, the mayor, and the county executive. That is unprecedented, and that's the moment that we're in. And so having this sort of, again, Scott used the word humility, Dr. Hacker's talking about neutral, right? So having that sort of approach in these entities is unheard of in this region, and it's part of why I think we're able to do some of the things we're doing.
That's interesting. So the kind of deconstruction of turf, it sounds like there's a lot changing, there's a lot happening right now. Why do you suppose that's happening now?
So part of it is that there is this change. Well, first, I guess part of it is just financially, right? These organizations don't have the capacity that they used to have from a personnel perspective. So that's just point one. If you're going to get something done, you have to figure out how to bring people together to make the change. But the other thing is there's a growing recognition for the last 10 years that what's happening in the city is happening in the Mon Valley, it's happening in the first ring suburbs. There's this growing understanding that, hey, we're connected by these different core issues, whether it's the environment, transportation, education. These are things that are affecting us today and are going to affect generations down the road. And that's partly how we ended up with the leadership at the elected level that we have, because people see, wait a minute, these things are connected, we are connected, and if we actually want to make progress as a region, then we're going to have to do that. And so,
Can I add to that?
So I have to give a plug to my boss as well. So the mayor being a visionary that he is, and having been a council member for so long and the voice of the people and really championing these opportunities, we, as many of you know, didn't have a relationship with the National League of Cities prior to him taking office. And Patrick also championing that as well. So the leadership matters.
The other thing is, I think there's these things called windows of opportunity. We often talk about that in policy and when you can get policy accomplished. So right now, there really is an incredible window of opportunity here, and I think that's being noticed by others. You know, I mean, people who probably never in their lives, like me, you know, never set foot in Pittsburgh before I took this job. But, you know, people calling from various foundations and stuff because, first of all, we are this Rust Belt city. And we have as much in common with the Clevelands as we do with the East Coast cities. And that's somewhat novel, I think. Our geography actually in some ways encapsulates us, you know, as this sort of southwestern Pennsylvania environment. And there's a lot happening economically. There's a lot happening in terms of us being, you know, sort of the blue area in a somewhat purple state. We now have a new governor. We're, I think, very hopeful that that's going to also help propel us, because we still have to contend with Harrisburg, which, believe me, and if you want to know anything about crazy government, we have it here in Pennsylvania. You know, Pittsburgh, for example, is a second-class city, and that sounds crazy, but it means that we can't pass our own taxes. We can't, you know, we can't do certain kinds of regulations without dealing with the state, whereas Philadelphia actually is a first-class city and has a lot more clout, and that comes up a lot. We actually give more money in taxes to the state than we ever get back. So there's a lot, I think, going on. I think that Western Pennsylvania, in many ways, was sort of seen as an outpost. And I think we're starting to have some heft.
So I guess while we're on the topic, I was going to ask this question a little later, but while we're on the topic of sort of the interconnection of things and of issues and of programs, so the city of Pittsburgh is also currently involved in another NLC project, which is around developing after-school and summer meal programs. And Betty is the lead for that project as well. So I want to just ask, how are you able to do both of these things? How are you connecting them together? And then how are partners involved in the interconnection of those two projects?
It's interesting because it's something that you would think would come second nature because there is such a relevant opportunity. Both of these are projects that fall under our broader Live Well Pittsburgh initiative. We have the Healthy Together enrollment campaign, and then Grub Up is our meals program, which is really just taking something we've always done, but it wasn't, just youth weren't as participating to the level that they used to, a lot of stigma associated with it. So we saw the opportunity to just brand it in a way that's much more accessible. So get your grub on, and it's resonated. Having these two complementary youth-focused campaigns, again, you would think it's second nature, and I don't know if Providence would agree, but it's actually really hard to constantly remind yourself, like, wait, these two are connected. How do we build on this? How do we leverage that? I'm going to be with youth and our partners in this space at this event. How do we cross-promote? So just being intentional around that. The opportunity through the CHAMPS grant that allowed for the Grub Up campaign to be built has allowed us to build more partners. Folks like Just Harvest locally, who's an anti-hunger group, and the food bank, who are also focused on access as a whole, more through the food space, but Just Harvest also helps with tax preparation. Again, natural partners, so it's allowed us to more intentionally work with them. It's also brought us closer to our city parks, so our Parks and Recs department, who administers the program, the meals program, and is someone that we look to partner with on the enrollment work. Again, we're all in our silos in different spaces, institutionally within the city, building those relationships, bringing people to the table, telling them we want to hear what hasn't worked before and build on that. And the CHAMPS grant really helped to expand that further and open that door further.
So I also have to point out that both the county executive and the mayor have been honored recently for their being statewide, at a statewide council, for their being champions of out-of-school time programming. And, if you go to Lights On later this week, or you go to different events, they're often participating in those events. And it's because, I think there are two reasons for this. First, they're both former council members, right? Our current mayor, former member of Pittsburgh City Council, current county exec, current member of county exec. You spend time out in the community, you spend time getting connected to those programs, and you see the nexus of learning and activity and all the good things that are happening for kids in those out-of-school time programs. You understand the important role that a school district plays, but you also understand, hey, this is a valuable space too, and we need to make sure that it's somehow tied into something, part of a larger entity or essence. And I think the other thing is that in both cases, they're both champions of education for kids. We have 42 school districts in the county, and the school district in the city is a separate government entity altogether as well. So they don't have any direct jurisdiction. And again, understanding what the limitations are, this is a space in which they can both be champions without stepping on political toes that might otherwise get ruffled. This is a good space to be in to help and do good work on behalf of kids. So they both get that.
Yeah, that's great. So I do want to open it up because I know that there's probably a lot of questions brewing. I'm going to ask one more question, though, before we turn it over to the group. Are there any partners, it's kind of a two-part question. Are there any partners that should be part of the campaign or at the campaign table that are not? And then the other part of that question is, were there any partners that were part of the campaign and it just didn't quite work out? and why?
So, as far as being here at this particular table, Leslie from the Consumer Health Coalition is here, and Sean from Enroll America. Both are part of the team, and I think everybody in this room is familiar with the work of Enroll America. So we could go on about how great that is. The one thing I do want to point out, and we've talked about this at early meetings and at the different cross-site meetings, but the work of the Consumer Health Coalition is probably one of the most. It's a very, very special organization in this region doing amazingly good work in a way that many other cities don't have, many other regions don't have. We're very lucky to have them here. So they actually also should be here in a way. And actually we've actually kept, I think we've kept the group together. We've gone through some changes, we've gone through some shifting, and I think going back to what Betty was saying at the beginning, this was definitely not a perfect plan. We started with the plan, we've adjusted, and we've had to have some very honest conversations filled with humility and think about how we can adjust and shift. But we've sort of kept everybody together, I think.
If I could add, one, not missing component, but one component I would love to see mature over time is the inclusion of our regional research community. We have a lot of, research institutions, CMU, Pitt, many universities, and also many private sector or private, institution research firms like RAND or Mathematica. So why I mention that is I would love to mature our efforts to the point where we're going to them with the things that we're trying to solve and that we're trying to forecast rather than them coming to us, because we already live in the world of them coming to us. And when they're coming to us, they're coming with their very niche intentions of, one research project here, one broad effort there. The challenge in that is, and Karen kind of alluded to this, it's like we have all these, orbiting parts right now, and they're all connected, and we're, on a course to, to firm up those connections. And once that those connections are even firmer, I think going proactively to our research community rather than just them playing in our sandbox, I think is a necessary step at some point. Great point.
I would add, yes, we've kept the band together, which is great. We expanded the band with the addition of Enroll America, as we talked about earlier in the conference, and the important asset that that's been. I'd also say 211 is not in the room, but that's a development that we made as we were just thinking through. They had received a grant as well to publicize during open enrollment and increase access and help with scheduling. And it was like, okay, well, we have this that we're doing and you have that. How do we do it together and just be more strategic and more effective? And they've been a great partner pushing any enrollment appointments that come into the Consumer Health Coalition. And we actually have a planning meeting coming up, so as we look ahead at 2016, and one of the things that we've started to talk about is who's not at the table, and we want to make sure is there next year.
So I'm just going to add to that because I think that the state is a big partner in this. And, again, looking at this more from a policy perspective, the issues that we're encountering in terms of why, so first of all, and nobody else said it, but we probably only have 2,000 kids who at any given time don't have insurance in our jurisdiction. We do not have a large undocumented population. So pretty much every child should be able to get insurance. So then the questions are, well, why don't they? And as we began to explore those, it became very evident that a lot of the reasons have much more to do with what's happening with Medicaid or CHIP at the state level and the bureaucracy that's involved and the challenges of what happens when they fall on and off or they get, a new job or whatever it is. And I think that now that we have a new governor, there's a new head of the Department of Human Services, new secretary, which also includes Medicaid, there may be a potential to start to work on that. The other thing, remember, is we didn't, as I said before, we didn't have our Medicaid expansion plan, and that's really happening now. So, of course, Consumer Health Coalition is really pushing that out. We still don't really know the numbers in terms of how effective that's been working here in Pennsylvania, and I would tell you, and maybe Enroll America knows better, I think we're still grappling with what is our uninsured population and what do they look like. So I feel that those pieces, which maybe also speaks to what some of our colleagues in the research community can help us with, are critically important as we begin to sort of go into the next phases, certainly at least from the county level, because why would we have people who are uninsured? Right. And what's that all about? And it's, and I think we heard here before that, insurance is like first step. And then you have all the other steps that happen after you are insured. The other thing that we're seeing here, and I tend to find myself often in the policy arena, is I am very concerned, and it's not so much for children, but certainly for adults, that we are seeing in our area an increase in high deductibles. And even in terms of what people are choosing within the Affordable Care Act, they're choosing plans that have very high deductibles, the bronze plan. And so what we don't know is how that's going to impact their ability to actually use the system. They can get preventive care, but God forbid they have something wrong, now they have to pay for it. So how that's going to impact things like mental health, et cetera, for what we would be considering a commercially insured population who is likely to be working, but maybe working poor, I think is another question that we have to look at.